Hey guys, Frosty Knives here, back with another book review, another review of another classic, and today we are going to be taking a look at The Omen by David Seltzer. And I am a little tired right now, but I wanted to get this review out, so here we are. And this is more of a classic film than a classic book. This is a case where the movie came out first, and this is a novelization of the movie right here. Terrifying new shocker of supernatural evil from 20th Century Fox. So this is a very thin novelization of the movie. And so this book came out in 1976. And it's a very short novel. It's 152 pages. So nothing too terribly long and arduous. And we all pretty much know the story of The Omen. The story of Jeremy and Kathleen Thorne, whose son Damien, spoiler alert, I guess, for anybody who hasn't seen this yet or read it, whose son Damien is the Antichrist. Dum, 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 dum. And there was this, this comes out in a period of time, a decade, maybe even longer, but this was just a period of time where we just loved and books and movies about evil children and children that were bad and children with powers and all that. I mean, we've got The Omen with Damien. We've got The Exorcist, which we just reviewed with Reagan. We've got stories like Rosemary's Baby, which came out in the 60s, movies like Village of the Damned, all kinds of evil platinum-haired children. And all along that, in that time period, we just loved, at this time, I guess, stories of children and evil children and bad seeds and children with powers. I think that's a good, one of the reasons, I think, why Stephen King's first novel was Carrie. Not that Carrie was evil, but again, a child with supernatural powers. Just sort of the flavor of the month or the flavor of the decade in horror. And we love this stuff. So, this, what surprised me about this book, other than the length, it was really short. Took me 3 days to read it. Probably 2 days too long. But took me 3 days to read it. It is a story about Damien, but Damien is not the focus. The focus is the father. Focus is Jeremy. Jeremy is the one that the book focuses on, and as he begins to see and unravel what his child is, what Damien is, what his child is capable of, and as he begins to research that and discover exactly what the hell is going on. What the hell is going on with his child. I mean, I didn't find this book to be scary. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, so I can't really comment on that, but I don't really recall remembering the movie being scary to me either. It's a lot of sort of horrific things happen, and again, kind of like The Exorcist, they sort of keep the doubt in your mind about Damien. Is Damien really evil? Or are these things that are just sort of happening around Damien and people think that he's evil? You really don't get that answer until the end of the book, when you discover that, yes, Damien is the Antichrist and Damien is evil and Damien is causing all these things to happen. But they try to keep that doubt in your mind, sort of like they did with The Exorcist. Try to keep that doubt whether or not she was really possessed. Same goes here. Is he really who he says he is, or are just people just grasping and jumping at shadows? But I think part of the real horror with this book, and with these types of books, is that they're children that are doing these things. And we, as the species, collectively, as a species, and I think all species do this, but we as a species, we tend to protect and nurture the young, the children, the offspring, because that is how species survive. They survive by having offspring, and then the offspring grow up and become, and that perpetuates the cycle. So we really have this innate drive to protect children. You know, when you take any horror book or movie or whatever, and the evil in it, be it a zombie, a werewolf, a vampire, a creature, whatever the case may be, if it's an adult evil, then we are right there, and we can take care of that, and we have no qualms about taking care of that. There's no qualms about putting down vampires and you know, zombies and other things that go bump in the night, as long as they are adult, right? Or they're adult appearing, and we make that distinction. But when the evil is a child, then there's just something in us that says we can't do that. That's what Jeremy sort of wrestles with in this whole book, is that this is a 4-year-old, 5-year-old child. This is his son. And you expect me to do, even when he starts digging, he sees what happens around Damien. He sees the deaths that happen and the bad things that happen. When he starts digging, and he starts seeing how Damien was created and the stories, and even at the end when he realizes that, when he finds out that Damien's mother was a jackal, right? Damien was born from a jackal. And he realizes intellectually at the end that he knows that this is the Antichrist, and that Damien is not human, and that Damien is a creature, a demon, an evil entity that needs to be vanquished. And he knows that intellectually. He has a hard time making that leap to infanticide, to committing murder of a child. And I think really that's where the horror, right, and a lot of these types of stories are. You know, the same thing with Reagan, the same thing with Rosemary's Baby, the same thing with I just had it and I lost it. The same thing with Pet Sematary, right? When the evil is presented to you in the guise of a child, that is where we as adults say, that's where we draw the morality line. We go, I can't do that. Like Jeremy says in the book, I can't murder my son. You expect me to murder a child. That's the real horror, and that's the real tragedy. That was the real tragedy in Pet Sematary. Was not that Gage died, really. That's a tragedy. And not that Lewis buried him and brought him back. That's a tragedy too. But the real tragedy is that at the end, Lewis had to murder his own son. Even though Gage was no longer his son. Even though Gage was evil. Real tragedy is that Lewis was put in a position where he had to murder his own child. Same thing that Jeremy was put into position in this book, that he had to make a choice, and he had to choose to murder his own child. And I think that's sort of where the horror is as we watch and read books like this. Not the fact that he's an antichrist, and not the fact that he's murdering people and all this terrible stuff is going on around him. Not the fact that Reagan is possessed and all this terrible stuff. But that these are children, and that these are children really is it's a symbol of innocence, right? And when that purity, when that innocence gets corrupted by evil, well, that's the real horror. Because if that can happen to a child, that can happen to any of us. That can happen to anyone. And children being the symbol of purity and innocence, when they become corrupted to the point where, like, Reagan was corrupted, or Damien being the Antichrist, when evil has corrupted them that much, they're no longer. That's the horror, I think. That's the horror in stories like this, and that's where we, as adults, sort of draw a line about what we are willing to do and what we might not be willing to do. Overall, the book was well written. The book was really not terrifying. I didn't find it to be horrifying or terrifying. I found it to be interesting. I believe I gave it a mediocre score of 3 on Goodreads. And the book was okay. I don't really remember liking the whole... This spawned a franchise. It was like 4 Omen movies. And I think I only ever see the first one, and it's not really a franchise I ever got into. But, you know, overall, it's an interesting read, and, you know, it is considered a classic. At least the film is. And this is based just off the film, so ergo by association, that is also potentially a classic. It was okay. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't terribly written. It was pretty much the movie in book form. There's some good parts to it. The horror was good. The struggle was good. Him finding out what was going on, the investigation, all of that stuff was good. The way it ended was pretty good. So, I mean, overall, it's an interesting read. Whether or not you want to put something like that in your collection is up to you. You can probably live without it, really. But again, nowadays, evil children movies and stories are a dime a dozen. But this was the flavor of the week at the time, was just evil children running around doing evil things. So it was okay. I wouldn't certainly not rush out and read it. But if you happen to pick it up and you want to see what it's all about, or you happen to pick up the movie, and want to see what that's all about, it is considered one of the early horror classics from the 70s. So that's kind of my review of The Omen. Wasn't much to talk about because there wasn't much going on in the book. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. So that's the story of The Omen, the story of Damien. Not too many people are naming their kids Damien. Also, Damien was the name of the priest in The Exorcist. So Damien must have been a popular name in the 70s. Because that's two characters in two different novels that were named Damien. Nowadays, there's no... I don't think we know anybody named Damien. Damien's sort of a no-no name for children. A no-no name. So, guys, that's my review of The Omen. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, you know, don't rush out to read it, but if you want to complete your collection of classics, well, there you go. Hope you liked the video. And I hope you subscribe and do all the things with the bells and the whistles and the ding-dings and the doo-doos and whatnot. And pass it around, tell your friends, tell your enemies, and until next time, we will see you when we see you.